Hi everyone, welcome to Great Series, a series I started to essentially summarize, organize, and present a few ideas from a few thought leaders, thinkers, entrepreneurs, and a few people who have impacted the way I think, the way I make decisions, and the way I approach day to day activities. So, today I'd like to focus on Naval Ravikanth, who is the founder of AngelList, which is a platform for entrepreneurs, VCs, and job seekers, and that connects all of them. Naval Ravikanth recently had an interview with Shane Parrish, who is the founder of Farnam Street Blog, a fantastic blog I highly recommend if you're into learning about mental models and how do great people lead their lives. So, in their interview, they discussed a lot of ideas, and I tried to boil everything down to three fundamental main ideas that sort of summarize Naval Ravikanth's philosophy around life, making decisions, and so on and so forth. And today I'd just like to focus on that. So, number one is his foundational principles. One of the first principles Naval Ravikanth has is to think long term. He says that as an entrepreneur, he always thinks long term and never short term. In fact, he would forego the short term benefit just to think about the long term consequences of any decision that he makes. So, that really struck a chord with me because I realized that, let's say, if you are working on a skill and it's essentially compound interest, because let's say you're at skill level 1 today and you improve 1% today, and if you do that for 365 days and you do simple math, it's like 1.01 raised to the power of 365, which essentially gives you a number close to 38, which means that if you start today and if you continue improving 1% every day, by the end of the year you'll be 38 times better as compared to what you started with. That really struck a chord with me and really made me realize how I should think long term and not just short term. The second principle that Naval talks about is building pure relationships. In the sense that in any relationship, one should not have to look up to someone or look down on someone. Which really makes sense to me because that actually breeds a lot of genuinity into the relationship, which is something that's very beautiful because there's no power disparity, there's no ill feeling between the two individuals in a relationship, and taught me how to not look up to anyone or look down on someone. That's just a very fantastic principle to have for the long term. The third principle Naval talks about is that he believes in radical honesty. He quotes Feynman and says that you should never fool anyone and you are the easiest person to fool. Just that quote really made me thinking about, say, the idealized version of myself that I want to be and the actual version of myself that I currently am. And I think that the mind can often fool one into believing that they are the idealized version or that I am that super productive individual who's always making use of his time trying to do meaningful things, whereas I may not be that individual. And I think Naval's focus on radical honesty and exploring whether one is the idealized version that one tells themselves they are is true or not really struck a chord with me. The second component in this is when he talks about Warren Buffett's criterion for offering feedback, which is to praise specifically and criticize generally. He says that if you're offering praise to anyone, you should always offer it and direct it to a specific person as if they did everything. And whenever you have to offer constructive feedback, it's always better to offer it in a way that is non offensive, such that you criticize or you critique the methods that the person used rather than the person themselves. And that also was very insightful for me because it's a good life skill to have and something that's really meaningful whenever you're offering constructive feedback. The second key insight of the podcast interview was talking about the philosophical underpinnings that Naval has. And I would categorize Naval's philosophy into a mixture of Stoicism, Vedanta, which is a branch of Indian philosophy, and Buddhism. So Naval calls himself a rational Buddhist, which is that he accepts all the ideas of Buddhism, but specifically rejects those that cannot be proven by science and evolution. Based off of his other ideas and his inspirations like J.D. Krishnamurti and Osho, his thoughts are very similar to what Vedanta says or what Stoicism says. So, for example, a few ideas are that the mind is like a monkey mind and it's your job as the individual to always control the mind, not let it go haywire, and let it be your servant rather than the master. Another idea is that you should always treat money as a means to an end rather than the end itself. So you should never chase money per se. You should chase something that's more meaningful than just money. He also then talks about why you should constantly be in a process of dissolving the sense of self, the sense of ego, rather than strengthening it as you age. So, based off of these ideas, Naval's philosophy and his philosophical underpinnings are strongly rooted in a mixture of Buddhism, Vedanta, and Stoicism. And I highly suggest that if you're interested in any one of these fields, please feel free to read about them anywhere on the internet. The third key idea of the interview was the frameworks that Naval uses. And that was really interesting because he uses a lot of mental models and a lot of mental frameworks to make his day-to-day decisions. A few of them that I really think were useful were, number one, that you should always chase freedom from and not freedom to. What he really means is that whenever we're in our teenagers or in our 20s, we always want the freedom to do something, freedom to pursue something, freedom to take a trip with friends, and so on and so forth. And he says that as you age, the freedom to should change to freedom from, and you should chase freedom from making 100 decisions a day. He says that because freedom from is more liberating than freedom to, and that is one of his key frameworks in making day-to-day decisions. The second framework he uses is that of success, and he says that success is not about making the right decisions, it's about avoiding the incorrect ones. And he talks about Warren Buffett, and he says how Warren Buffett evaluates people, which is based off of a combination of intelligence, energy, and integrity. And one of the last frameworks that I really enjoyed was learning about how you should derive anything from the basics. Naval is a big proponent of learning anything ground up and building it bottom up instead of having a high level understanding or a superfluous understanding of a complicated topic. So a few books that he recommends are Thinking Physics, which is, as he describes, a book that is used in kindergarten for learning physics and also used in graduate school. Another book that he recommends is Think Explainer, which is written by the author of XKCD, a famous comic strip that explains a lot of complicated topics in a very easy to understand manner. And Naval believes in sort of mastering the basics instead of pretending that you know all the complicated things about a certain theory. And based off of the understanding of basics, he says that you can then go on into any direction and build off things just by yourself. So I think these were the three key ideas that I gathered from the podcast interview, which were essentially Naval's foundational principles, Naval's philosophical underpinnings, and finally the mental frameworks or the mental models that he uses to make his day-to-day decisions. I really enjoyed listening to the podcast because it gave me all these interesting ideas that my mind is still thinking about. So I highly recommend just going to Spotify. I'm sure that you would be able to come up with your own insights. Feel free to let me know about any other interesting ideas that you think were sort of left out in this video, and I'll be happy to talk about them. Thank you. Thank you so much.